And there was also a new medium, the infant cinema, which now began to come into its own. Film historian John Huntley of the British Film Institute.
It's hard to realize now that at the start of the First World War, there were in fact 5,000 cinemas in this country, serving an audience of something like 20 million people a week. Now that compares with only 4 million a week today. But when the war began, the cinema really had no status almost of any kind at all. It was looked upon, if people ever thought about it at all in high places, as just a kind of toy for the labouring classes. It wasn't, in fact, until much later, 2 years, 1916, before the cinema was recognised as a legitimate device for conveying information, and they then formed something called the Topical War Film Committee. Now, facilities for the early cameramen were therefore absolutely nil. They got no handouts, they got no information at all about what was going on at the front. They just simply were left entirely to their own resources. And their own resources were pretty tricky. They had massive great cameras like this on gigantic tripods, and they were very noisy indeed. Now that in fact is a genuine instrument of the First World War. It was actually used on the front itself. And as you can see, there was no question of sneaking up and grabbing a few shots with a machine that made as much noise as that. And so it was that the film industry started off the war at zero. Strangely, it had exactly the opposite effect. The film industry fell over itself to demonstrate how progressive it was, how much it was in line with what was thought of in those days as the official propaganda line. Because they couldn't get any actuality material from the front, they tried other technical devices of the cinema, and the first one they hit upon was the animated cartoon, which was just beginning to develop at that time.
These early cartoons reveal the fact that most of the artists who took part came from the world of newspapers and the political cartoon. They were naive and unsubtle in approach. This one mixes an appeal to swat that fly with crude jokes about the Hun. You might almost be looking at a series of newspaper strip cartoons. This is the British Bulldog, Bonzo, created by another cartoonist, G.E. Studdy. Here, Bonzo represents British Bulldog pluck in destroying Hun frightfulness. Studdy developed this extraordinary technique which became his trademark by drawing everything from this bird's eye point of view. Perhaps the most famous of them all was Lancelot Speed. Here he's using the old lightning sketch technique of the music hall, adapted to the cinema. He was not only more sophisticated than the others, but he was, in fact, one of the first. Before the war, he specialized in general political cartoons for various newspapers, and he did deer-stalking pictures for the illustrated sporting and dramatic news. Now he turned to Hun stalking in this story of the contemptible little army.
Well, of course, cartoons were only part of the story. As the war went on, instructional films, straight dramas, everything was produced by the cinema towards this central theme. And people like Dame Ellen Terry, none less, who many would consider today one of the greatest actresses of our age, I suppose, she too came into a film, an official Ministry of Information film, called Invasion of Britain.